261 FNAF facts to fall asleep to one of the most layered, haunting and surprisingly emotional fictional universes ever built, a place where animatronics dream, children never truly disappear, and every dark corner hides a story that was never meant to be found. I want to be upfront with you about who I am and why I made this. I'm the creator and editor behind this video, and I put this together because I've spent years diving deep into the Five Nights at Freddy's universe, not just as a fan, but as someone genuinely obsessed with the way Scott Cawthon constructed a mythology out of silence, purple sprites, and toy store nightmare fuel. This isn't a casual trivia list. When I sat down to assemble these 261 facts, I made a deliberate choice to order them thematically rather than chronologically, because the FNAF timeline is famously broken and fragmented, and I wanted you to feel the lore the way it was discovered, piece by piece, in the dark. I also chose to exclude a handful of heavily debated fan theories that haven't been canonically confirmed, because I wanted this script to stand on solid ground. What you're about to hear is researched, sourced, and curated with care. So get comfortable, dim the lights if you haven't already, and let this wash over you. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. And if you enjoy this video, a like goes an incredibly long way. It takes 1 second, and it genuinely helps more people find their way here. Now, let's get into it. Fact 1. Five Nights at Freddy's was created almost entirely by one man. Scott Cawthon, a Christian game developer from Texas, built the original game largely on his own using Autodesk Maya for the 3D models and ClickTeam Fusion for the game engine. Before FNAF, Scott had released several other games, including a Christian-themed RPG called Chipper and Sons Lumber Co. The reviews for that game mocked the characters, saying they looked like scary animatronic animals. Instead of giving up, Scott leaned into that criticism and created the most iconic horror franchise in indie gaming history. That pivot from humiliation to inspiration is one of the most quietly remarkable origin stories in all of gaming. Fact 2. The very first Five Nights at Freddy's game was released on August 8th, 2014, on Desura, a now-defunct digital distribution platform. It wasn't an immediate viral explosion. It gained traction gradually, helped enormously by YouTube Let's Players who found the jump scares irresistible content. Within weeks, it had migrated to Steam and become one of the most talked about horror games of that era. The timing was perfect. The gaming community was hungry for something raw, cheap, and genuinely terrifying, and FNAF delivered all three in a package that felt completely unlike anything else on the market. Fact 3. The original game takes place at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a fictional family restaurant that is an unmistakable nod to Chuck E. Cheese and Showbiz Pizza, real-world entertainment venues that featured animatronic bands in the 1980s. Scott has openly acknowledged this influence. The aesthetic of the original game, the flickering lights, the stained carpet, the institutional feel of a restaurant that should be cheerful but isn't, was carefully constructed to evoke the specific kind of childhood unease that places like that could trigger, even when nothing was technically wrong. Fact 4. The four main animatronics in the first game are Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie the Bunny, Chica the Chicken, and Foxy the Pirate Fox. Each one has a distinct movement pattern and personality coded into their behavior. Freddy tends to stay back and observe, moving only when you're not looking at him. Bonnie is aggressive and tends to enter from the left side of the building. Chica comes from the right, and Foxy sprints down the left hallway in a full run if you don't check Pirates Cove frequently enough. These weren't random design choices. Each one was calibrated to teach the player a different kind of paranoia. Fact 5. The phone guy, the disembodied voice that gives you instructions across the first few games, is voiced by Scott Cawthon himself. This adds an eerie layer of intimacy to the tutorials. The creator of the nightmare is also the one telling you how to survive it. The phone guy's messages are deceptively cheerful at first, filled with corporate doublespeak about animatronic free roaming and liability concerns, before slowly revealing the true horror of the situation. His fate in Night 4 of the original game, punctuated by the unmistakable sound of an animatronic attack in the background, remains one of the most chilling moments in the series. Fact 6. The lore of Five Nights at Freddy's is built on a concept called the missing children incident. This backstory, hinted at through newspaper clippings hidden in the game's minigames and confirmed through later entries, establishes that at some point before the events of the first game, several children were murdered inside Freddy Fazbear's Pizza by a man in a purple security guard uniform. Their souls became trapped inside the animatronics. This is the foundational tragedy of the entire franchise. Every game, in some form, circles back to the weight of what happened to those kids. Fact 7. The purple figure seen committing murders in the Pixel minigames is almost universally referred to in the fan community as Purple Guy. His identity was one of the most debated mysteries in the early days of the fandom. Scott Cawthon eventually confirmed, through later games and the novel trilogy, that this character is William Afton, the co-founder of Fazbear Entertainment, the company that owns the restaurants. The revelation that the killer wasn't some random monster, but a businessman, a father, and a founder of the very institution meant to bring joy to children added a layer of real-world horror to the franchise that pure supernatural storytelling could never have achieved. Fact 8. William Afton has one of the most elaborate villain histories in horror gaming. He is the co-founder of Fazbear Entertainment, alongside Henry Emily. He is a father. He is a murderer. He becomes something far worse than human. And through multiple timelines, multiple bodies, and multiple layers of spiritual corruption, he becomes what fans call Springtrap, a decayed, wretched creature condemned to keep existing long after he should have stopped. His design in FNAF 3, a deteriorated spring bunny suit with a human skeleton barely visible inside the decaying shell, is considered by many fans to be the single most disturbing character design in the franchise. Fact 9. Henry Emily is William Afton's business partner and arguably the true moral center of the FNAF universe. Henry's daughter, Charlotte, often called Charlie, was one of William's earliest victims. Henry's grief and guilt drive his actions throughout the series, culminating in one of the most emotionally devastating monologues in gaming history. His speech at the end of FNAF 6, also known as Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. That monologue, delivered over an image of the restaurant burning down with everyone inside, is the closest the franchise has ever come to achieving genuine tragedy in the classical sense. Fact 10. The full text of Henry's speech at the end of FNAF 6 is considered by many in the community to be one of Scott Cawthon's finest pieces of writing. In it, Henry addresses each of the souls trapped in the building, including his own daughter, the children murdered by William, and William himself. He tells them that their suffering is over. He tells them they can rest. Then he addresses the player directly, referring to them as a brave volunteer who helped make this possible. The speech is a farewell to characters the player has spent years with across multiple games, and its emotional resonance hits hardest when you've put in the time to understand what every single name means. Fact 11. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was based on a real establishment called Showbiz Pizza Place, which later merged with Chuck E. Cheese. Showbiz opened in 1980 and featured a band of animatronic characters called the Rockafire Explosion, created by Aaron Fechter. The parallels to Freddy's band are obvious. A bear, a rabbit, a dog, and various other characters performing on a stage while children eat pizza beneath flickering lights. The man behind the Rockafire Explosion, Aaron Fechter, has spoken publicly about the parallels, and his feelings on the comparison have been mixed. Still, the cultural debt FNAF owes to that era of entertainment is undeniable. Fact 12. The animatronics in the original FNAF are programmed, within the fiction of the game, to roam freely at night because their servos will lock up if they remain stationary for too long. This is the official in-universe explanation for why they move. Of course, the real explanation, that they're possessed by the souls of murdered children and are drawn to the night guard out of either confusion or vengeance, runs parallel to this mechanical justification in a way that makes both explanations feel true simultaneously. The game never forces you to choose which version of reality to believe, and that ambiguity is a huge part of what makes it so unsettling. Fact 13. The night guard in the original game is later confirmed to be Mike Schmidt, though this name appears only on his paycheck at the end of the game. Mike Schmidt is paid a weekly wage of $120, which works out to roughly $4 per hour over the course of a typical security shift, well below minimum wage even by 1990 standards. This detail, buried in a single paycheck screen, quietly communicated volumes about the kind of desperation that would lead someone to take this job in the first place. It's a small piece of economic horror hiding underneath the supernatural horror. Fact 14. The doors in the original game cannot both be closed simultaneously for very long, because doing so drains the power too quickly. This forces the player into a constant risk-reward calculation. Keep the doors open and save power, or close them and risk running out before 6 a.m. The power mechanic is brilliant game design, but it's also narratively meaningful. The night guard is underfunded, under-resourced, and essentially abandoned by the company to deal with a situation that management knows is dangerous. Closing both doors is the safe choice, but the company's negligence has made the safe choice unsustainable. Fact 15. When Freddy Fazbear kills you, the game over screen shows a still image of the player character stuffed into a Freddy Fazbear suit, with the suit's eyes visible in the dark, and blood and teeth visible inside the mask. This image is iconic in horror gaming. It's never animated, never accompanied by sound effects beyond a brief musical sting, and it lasts only a moment. But the implication it carries is devastating. The animatronics stuff dead bodies into their suits because they believe the suits are empty and need to be filled. In their fractured, haunted logic, they are completing a task that was never meant to be their burden. Fact 16. FNAF 2 was released on November 10th, 2014, just 3 months after the original. The speed of development was extraordinary. Scott Cawthon, working largely alone, built a full sequel in roughly 90 days. FNAF 2 introduces the concept of withered animatronics, older, deteriorated versions of the original 4 characters that have been stripped down to their bare endoskeletons and stored in the back room. Their designs are disturbing in a way that goes beyond jump scares. Something about an animatronic with its face hanging off, exposing the machinery underneath, triggers a deeply primal discomfort in most people, and Scott clearly understood that. Fact 17. FNAF 2 is actually a prequel to the original game, despite being released second. This wasn't immediately obvious, and part of the joy of early FNAF was reconstructing the timeline from clues scattered across both games. The Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in FNAF 2 is a different, newer location that opened after the original restaurant was closed following the missing children incident. The new location features the toy animatronics, brighter, more modern designs based on the originals, while the withered original animatronics are kept in the back. The coexistence of the polished new models and the decaying originals is a visual metaphor for the company's habit of papering over horror with cheerfulness. Fact 18. The toy animatronics in FNAF 2 were supposedly upgraded with facial recognition technology connected to a criminal database to prevent registered sex offenders from entering the restaurant. This detail, mentioned by the phone guy, is played as a casual corporate safety measure, but it reveals something chilling about Fazbear Entertainment's awareness that their previous locations had been sites of violence against children. They know children have been harmed at their restaurants. And rather than shutting down, investigating, or actually addressing the root cause, they install facial recognition software and keep the doors open. Fact 19. The marionette, also known as the puppet, is one of the most significant characters in the entire franchise. First appearing in FNAF 2, the puppet is a tall black and white masked figure that lives inside a music box in the prize corner. If the player fails to keep the music box wound, the puppet will emerge and instantly end the game. The only animatronic in FNAF 2 that cannot be stopped by the Freddy Fazbear mask that protects against all the others. This mechanic sets the puppet apart. It operates by different rules, which is a narrative signal as much as a gameplay one. Fact 20. The puppet, as revealed in later games and minigames, is the spirit of Henry Emily's daughter, Charlotte. She was the first child killed by William Afton, murdered outside the restaurant in the rain while her father was working inside. The puppet is the one who gave life to the other animatronics after they were murdered. stuffing their souls into the suits and keeping them tethered to the physical world. In the FNAF mythology, the puppet is simultaneously a victim, a caretaker, and an anchor for every other haunted animatronic in the franchise. She is the reason they persist. Fact 21. The minigames in FNAF 2 that reveal the puppet's backstory are among the most emotionally affecting moments in the entire series. One in particular shows a small child standing in the rain outside of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, with the puppet approaching her as her vitals fade to nothing. The pixel art is crude by any technical measure, but the scene communicates grief with an efficiency that most big-budget games would struggle to match. It's a child dying alone in the rain, while music plays from inside the building. That image doesn't require elaborate explanation to land. Fact 22. The FNAF 2 night guard is Jeremy Fitzgerald, whose name also appears only on a paycheck. Jeremy's employment at the new Freddy's location ends abruptly. He is moved to the day shift, which initially sounds like a promotion until you learn that the day shift ends on a night described in a newspaper article as a birthday party gone wrong. The implication is that Jeremy was killed or severely injured on his final day of work. His story ends off-screen, communicated entirely through a single newspaper clipping, and that restraint makes it hit harder than any cutscene could. Fact 23. The toy Chica in FNAF 2 has a unique behavior where she removes her beak before leaving her starting position on the show stage. By the time she reaches the office, she has also removed her eyes, leaving only the bare plastic shell of her face with empty sockets. Nobody in the game acknowledges this. The phone guy doesn't mention it. It's just something she does, a grotesque ritual that happens without comment or explanation. The choice to leave it unexplained is deeply effective. Some horrors are worse when they're presented as routine. Fact 24. Balloon Boy, affectionately and frustratingly referred to as BB by the player base, is an animatronic in FNAF 2 who carries a balloon and a sign. He's one of the more unusual characters because he doesn't directly attack the player. Instead, if he enters the office, he laughs and disables the player's flashlight and vents for the rest of the night, leaving them completely vulnerable to other animatronics. Balloon Boy became one of the most divisive characters in the franchise. Some players found his mechanic deeply annoying. Others found the concept of a creature that doesn't kill you itself, but simply takes away your ability to protect yourself far more unsettling than any direct attack. Fact 25. FNAF 3 was released on March 2nd, 2015, and shifted the formula significantly. Rather than managing multiple animatronics in a restaurant, you manage a single haunted attraction, Fazbear's Fright, with only one animatronic physically present. That animatronic is Springtrap. The game takes place 30 years after the events of the first game. Fazbear's Fright was a real haunted house, built by Fazbear Entertainment to capitalize on the urban legend status the restaurant had accumulated over the decades. They found artifacts from the old locations and used them as props. They found Springtrap and had no idea what they were actually bringing back. Fact 26. Springtrap is William Afton, trapped inside the Spring Bonnie animatronic suit. The backstory, revealed through minigames in FNAF 3, is that after the events of FNAF 2, dismantled the animatronics to free the souls trapped inside them, and was then cornered by those same souls. In a panic, he hid inside the Spring Bonnie suit, an older style of animatronic with a spring lock mechanism that allowed it to be worn by a human performer. The spring locks failed, the suit collapsed around him, he died inside it, and his soul, too corrupt and stubborn to move on, stayed. Fact 27. The spring lock mechanism is one of the most conceptually horrible things in the FNAF universe. Spring lock suits were designed to be worn by human performers, requiring the internal mechanical components to be manually locked outward to create space for a body inside. If the locks failed, which the phone guy in FNAF 1 warns was a known hazard, especially in humid conditions, the entire internal mechanism would snap back inward violently and instantaneously. The phone guy describes it without ceremony. The spring locks will need to hold back both the spring and the metal rods if they break, he says. That's bad. It is, without question, bad. Fact 28. FNAF 3's minigames are told from the perspective of the animatronics themselves, specifically the 5 children whose souls have been freed from their suits. They are depicted as small glowing figures who follow the player, as Purple Guy, through pixelated corridors. Watching William dismantle them and then seeing their ghostly selves converge on him in the moment of his death is one of the most cathartic sequences in the franchise. After years of the player being the one chased, the tables are briefly turned, and the experience of watching a predator cornered by his victims carries enormous emotional weight. Fact 29. The ending screens of FNAF 3 are split into a good ending and a bad ending, achieved by completing or failing to complete hidden minigames throughout the nights. In the bad ending, the souls of the children are not freed, and the screen fades on a continuation of their suffering. In the good ending, the souls are freed, and the game shows 5 small heads representing each child transitioning from purple, the color of their suffering, to a peaceful golden yellow. It's a tiny visual change with enormous narrative significance. Yellow means rest. Yellow means it's over. Yellow is the first genuinely peaceful color in a franchise built on darkness. Fact 30. FNA 4 is the entry that divided the fanbase most sharply. Released on July 23, 2015, it takes place inside a child's bedroom during the child's nightmares. There are no cameras, no power meter, no music box, just a flashlight, 2 doors, a closet, and a child alone in the dark. The animatronics in this game, called the Nightmare animatronics, are grotesquely distorted versions of the original characters. Oversized, filled with rows of jagged teeth, with secondary heads growing from their bodies. They look less like animatronics, and more like what a traumatized child's mind would imagine an animatronic could become. Fact 31. The child in FNAF 4 is the crying child, a name given by the fandom to the young boy who appears in the mini-games between each night. He is visibly distressed throughout, afraid of the animatronics, bullied by his older brother, and deeply unhappy. The mini-games follow his day at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza for his birthday, culminating in his brother and friends forcing his head into Freddy Fazbear's mouth as a prank. The Fredbear animatronic's mouth then closes on the child's head, crushing his skull. He dies in a hospital a short time later, surrounded by the other animatronics standing vigil. This event is known as the Bite of 83. Fact 32. The Bite of 83 is significant not just as a tragic story beat, but as the earliest chronological event in the core timeline of the franchise. The crying child is widely believed to be the soul that eventually inhabits the Golden Freddy animatronic, a character who appears as a ghostly, collapsed version of Freddy Fazbear, flickering in and out of existence throughout the games. If this is correct, then the very first victim of the FNAF story isn't one of the children murdered by William Afton, it's his own son, killed by an accident caused by his other son. The Afton family is the tragedy within the tragedy. Fact 33. The older brother in FNAF 4, who torments the crying child throughout the minigames, is widely believed to be Michael Afton, William's eldest son, and one of the most important characters in the later entries of the franchise. Michael's guilt over his brother's death appears to be the driving force behind his actions in subsequent games, where he dedicates himself to undoing his father's legacy. This character arc, from a cruel older brother responsible for his sibling's death to an adult seeking redemption, is one of the more quietly human stories the franchise tells, and it's told almost entirely through implication. Fact 34. Michael Afton is the protagonist of FNAF Sister Location, released on October 7th, 2016. In this game, Michael works at Circus Babies Entertainment and Rental, a sister company to Fazbear Entertainment, secretly run by William Afton, maintaining animatronics called the Funtime animatronics, which were built by William specifically to lure and capture children. Sister Location is the most overtly narrative entry in the franchise up to that point, featuring fully voiced characters, scripted sequences, and a storyline that unfolds over the course of the week rather than being pieced together from environmental clues. Fact 35. Circus Baby is the main character of Sister Location and one of the most unnerving animatronics in the franchise, for reasons that go beyond her appearance. Baby is a red-haired, green-eyed clown animatronic designed to be endearing and approachable to children. She was built by William Afton, her father, and she was present the first time a child approached her alone. She has an ice cream compartment in her torso. The child reached for the ice cream. Baby's design, as William had programmed it, responded to the presence of a child alone by pulling them inside. The child was his own daughter, Elizabeth. Baby killed Elizabeth Afton, and then Elizabeth's soul became part of Baby. Fact 36. Elizabeth Afton's possession of Circus Baby is one of the most psychologically complex elements of the franchise. Baby remembers being Elizabeth. She speaks about her memories of being taken, and she speaks about it with a kind of detached wonder rather than horror. She also has access to Baby's programming, her databases, and all the experiences Baby has had since Elizabeth was absorbed. Over time, the line between Elizabeth and Baby becomes genuinely blurry, and the question of whether Elizabeth is controlling Baby or Baby is gradually replacing Elizabeth becomes one of the more philosophically disturbing threads in the franchise. Fact 37. Sister Location introduces the concept of scooping, a process in which an animatronic's internal components are liquefied and injected into a human body. This is how Baby, along with the other Funtime animatronics, take control of Michael Afton at the end of Sister Location. Michael, having been scooped, becomes a shambling host for the fused entity that will later be known as unhurried. The imagery of a human body being hollowed out and used as a biological disguise for a collective of animatronic souls is one of the most viscerally disturbing concepts in a franchise that has never shied away from body horror. Fact 38. After being taken over by unhurried, Michael Afton's body continues to decompose over time, eventually becoming too deteriorated for unhurried to maintain as a disguise. Unhurried expels itself from Michael's body through the sewer system, leaving him dead in an alleyway. But Michael does not stay dead. For reasons connected to his father's experiments with the remnant, the spiritual substance that allows souls to persist in the physical world, Michael reanimates and continues existing despite being a rotting corpse. This detail, combined with everything else we know about him, makes Michael Afton one of the most tragic figures in the franchise. He cannot die. He is not allowed to rest. Fact 39. The term remnant in the FNAF universe refers to a spiritual substance produced by intense emotional experiences, particularly those involving extreme fear and death. William Afton discovered remnant and dedicated enormous resources to studying and ultimately harvesting it. The animatronics contain remnant because they were possessed by the souls of murder victims, children who experienced profound terror at the moment of death. William believed that by harvesting remnant he could achieve a form of immortality. In a twisted way, he was right. His persistence through death after death, suit after suit, is remnant-driven survival. Fact 40. FNA Pizzeria Simulator, released on December 4th, 2017, is technically the culmination of the franchise's first major story arc. It follows a character, widely accepted to be Michael Afton, who is running a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location as a front for Henry Emily's plan to finally end the cycle of haunting and violence. The game is framed as a cheerful, colourful restaurant management sim, with bright menus and perky music, which layers over a brutal underlying narrative about luring damaged, haunted animatronics to a single location in order to burn them to nothing. Fact 41. The reveal at the end of Pizzeria Simulator that everything has been a trap, the restaurant, the management sim framing, the whole presentation is one of the most satisfying subversions in the franchise. You spent the game thinking you were running a pizza restaurant. Henry Emily was using you to collect every soul that needed to be freed. Every animatronic you salvaged was a tortured soul being guided to the place where they could finally rest. The entire cheerful shell of the game was a mercy wrapped in deception, which is, when you think about it, an almost perfect description of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza itself. Fact 42. Ultimate Custom Night, released on June 27, 2018, features 50 animatronics and is widely interpreted as William Afton's personal hell, a nightmare simulation in which he is tormented endlessly by every animatronic he has ever wronged. The game has no traditional ending. You cannot win in a meaningful sense. You can survive the night, but another night always follows. Certain voice lines from Cassidy, the soul inhabiting Golden Freddy, make this interpretation explicit. She tells him he will suffer. She tells him she will never let him leave. Ultimate Custom Night is the franchise's vision of eternal damnation, dressed up as a challenge mode. Fact 43. Cassidy is the name given to the child whose soul inhabits Golden Freddy, a detail confirmed in the novel trilogy and supported by in-game evidence. Cassidy is characterized as the most vengeful and persistent of William's victims, the one most committed to ensuring he never escapes punishment. Her fixation on William in Ultimate Custom Night, trapping him in an endless simulation, is the mirror image of William's own refusal to die and move on. Both of them are defined by their refusal to stop, one by hatred, one by corruption. They are locked in a loop that the games suggest may be genuinely infinite. Fact 44. FNAF Security Breach, released on December 16, 2021, marked a massive visual and structural departure from all previous entries. Developed by Steel Wool Studios rather than Scott Cawthon directly, Security Breach features a fully explorable 3D megamall called the Mega Pizzaplex, with free-roam gameplay, voiced characters, and multiple endings. The protagonist is a child named Gregory, who becomes trapped in the Pizzaplex overnight, and must navigate it with the help of Glamrock Freddy, one of the main stage animatronics who chooses to protect him rather than capture him. Fact 45. Glamrock Freddy is universally beloved by the FNAF community for being one of the most genuinely kind and protective characters in the franchise's history. In a universe full of predatory machines and corrupt adults, Freddy is a large bear animatronic who calls Gregory Superstar, does everything in his power to protect the child in his care, and occasionally malfunctions in ways that put both of them at risk, but never stops trying. Freddy's capacity for loyalty despite his own limitations is coded into his character so thoroughly that it becomes emotionally affecting in a way that surprises many players. He's a good bear in a bad situation, and the franchise doesn't have many of those. Fact 46. The villain of Security Breach is Vanny, a woman in a white bunny suit who serves as an agent for Glitchtrap, a digital entity that has infected the Fazbear Entertainment Network and uses humans as proxies. Vanny's real identity, partially obscured through the game's multiple endings, is believed to be a character named Vanessa, who also appears as a security guard in the Pizzaplex. The duality between Vanessa and Vanny, one trying to resist the programming, one acting on it, introduces questions about consent and autonomy that add psychological depth to what might otherwise be a straightforward villain. Fact 47. Glitchtrap, also called The Anomaly, first appears in FNAF Help Wanted, released in May 2019. Help Wanted is a VR game in which the player completes reimagined minigames based on the original FNAF entries. Hidden within the game's code is something that shouldn't be there, a presence that gradually reveals itself through audio fragments and cassette tapes left by a developer named Luis. By collecting these fragments, the player inadvertently reassembles this presence, and at the end of the game, the entity, Glitchtrap, merges with the player character. The ending is not triumphant. You didn't complete the game. You were used. Fact 48. Glitchtrap is widely theorized to be a digital manifestation of William Afton's consciousness, the latest form taken by someone who has refused to die across multiple decades and multiple bodies. The idea that William could persist not just in a rotting suit or a spring-lock contraption, but in lines of code, in data, in programming, represents the ultimate expression of his character. He is someone whose obsession with not dying has taken him beyond the physical entirely. If Glitchtrap is William, then he has found a form that doesn't rust, doesn't decay, and can spread to any connected device. That's not survival, that's infection. Fact 49. The FNAF novel trilogy, The Silver Eyes, The Twisted Ones, and The Fourth Closet, was co-written by Scott Cawthon and author Kira Breed Risley. These books expand on the lore of the games while occupying what some fans describe as a parallel canon, closely related to the games but not entirely consistent with them. The protagonist of the novels is Charlie Emily, Henry's daughter, who survived William Afton's initial attempt to kill her because her father built her a robotic replacement. Charlie is, in the novel continuity, a robot who believes she is human, built by a grieving father who could not accept the loss of his child. Fact 50. The novel trilogy's version of Charlie Emily raises one of the franchise's most philosophically interesting questions. If a being believes it is human, behaves as a human, is it human? Charlie has memories, emotions, and relationships. She doesn't know she's a robot. Her father built her to protect himself and possibly others from the grief of losing her. The books never definitively answer whether this was an act of love or an act of creation, whether Henry was parenting or engineering. That ambiguity is deliberate, and it enriches the character considerably. Fact 51. The FNAF Security Breach, Ruin DLC, released on July 25, 2023, follows a new protagonist named Cassie, who enters the now collapsed and devastated Pizzaplex, searching for Gregory. The Pizzaplex in ruin is overgrown with decay, the animatronics are gone or destroyed, and the whole environment feels like an aftermath, which thematically it is. Ruin introduces the Mimic, a new animatronic antagonist with the ability to learn and replicate behaviors, which ties directly into the deeper mythology of what Glitch Trap actually is and where the story is heading next. Fact 52. The Mimic, as elaborated in the FNAF Tales from the Plex anthology and broader franchise materials, is an animatronic designed to observe and replicate. It was never given moral reasoning or ethical constraints, just the capacity to learn. When it observed William Afton, it learned William Afton. It absorbed his behavior patterns, his movement, his willingness to harm. The Mimic didn't become William, it became a perfect behavioral copy of William, all the predatory capability with none of the remnant-based soul. This distinction between spiritual corruption and learned monstrosity creates a genuinely new kind of villain for the franchise to explore. Fact 53. Five Nights at Freddy's has sold over 30 million copies across all platforms and entries as of mid-decade, making it one of the most successful indie franchises in gaming history. This is all the more remarkable when you consider that Scott Cawthon spent years as a largely unknown developer before FNAF, releasing games that generated minimal attention. The lesson the gaming community has taken from Scott's story is discussed frequently: that failure and humiliation can be redirected, that criticism can be answered with invention rather than retreat, and that sometimes the thing you're most embarrassed about becomes the cornerstone of everything you build afterward. Fact 54. The FNAF fandom is one of the largest and most active in gaming. The fan community has produced thousands of fan games, animations, songs, artwork pieces, and pieces of analysis. Among the most beloved fan-made content is the FNAF the Musical series by Random Encounters, which set the lore of each game to original music. The depth of the fan engagement has consistently surprised outsiders. The willingness of FNAF fans to pour hundreds of hours into timeline reconstruction, theory crafting, and community debate reflects the genuine complexity of the source material. Fact 55. MatPat, the creator of the YouTube channel Game Theory, spent approximately a decade developing and revising FNAF theories, making the series one of the defining content pillars of Game Theory's entire run. His FNAF videos collectively amassed hundreds of millions of views and introduced the franchise's deeper lore to enormous numbers of people who might never have engaged with it otherwise. MatPat's retirement in 2024 was publicly acknowledged by Scott Cawthon with genuine warmth, cementing the relationship between creator and theorist as one of the more unusual and touching dynamics in gaming culture. Fact 56. Scott Cawthon retired from public game development in 2021, following controversy over political campaign donations. He announced his retirement in a lengthy post on Reddit, which also addressed the controversy directly. Since then, development of FNAF entries has been handled by Steelwool Studios and other collaborators, with Scott maintaining creative oversight. His retirement was complicated and emotionally charged, both for him and for a community that had grown up alongside his work, and the franchise's transition to a new development phase has been watched carefully by fans who care deeply about whether the lore remains internally consistent. Fact 57. The FNAF movie, released in theaters and on Peacock simultaneously on October 27, 2023, was one of the most anticipated video game film adaptations in years. Produced by Blumhouse Productions, the film stars Josh Hutcherson as Mike Schmidt and features Matthew Lillard as William Afton. The movie was a massive commercial success, grossing over $300 million globally against a modest budget, and was generally well received by fans of the franchise, despite simplifying the lore significantly for a mainstream audience. Matthew Lillard's performance as Afton was widely praised, bringing a specific kind of friendly menace to a character who had previously existed only as a purple pixel. Fact 58. The FNAF movie's approach to the lore made deliberate choices to consolidate and simplify elements that would have been incomprehensible to non-fans. The backstory of the animatronics being possessed by murdered children was preserved as the core supernatural premise, but the timeline was adjusted, relationships were altered, and certain characters were given prominent roles that they occupied differently or not at all in the games. These changes were contentious among hardcore fans, but the film's financial success and emotional impact on newer audiences suggests that the decision to prioritize accessibility over fidelity was, from a commercial standpoint, the right one. Fact 59. The original FNAF has been ported to virtually every major platform over its lifespan, including PC, iOS, Android, PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo Switch. The mobile versions were notable for being extremely affordable and brought the game to an entirely new generation of players who experienced it on phones and tablets. The Nintendo Switch port allowed players to experience the franchise on a handheld for the first time in a conventional sense, which was significant given how much of the franchise's audience had grown up playing on mobile devices. Fact 60. The sound design in the original FNAF games, largely created by Scott Cawthon himself, is a masterclass in the use of audio to create anxiety. The ambient noise of the original, the distant clanging, the humming of electricity, the indistinct sounds of movement just beyond what's visible, creates a continuous low-grade tension that other sounds then punctuate. The jump scare sounds, which are distorted screaming mixed with static, are intentionally designed to cause a visceral startle response that bypasses rational thought. The audio in FNAF doesn't tell you a story. It tells your nervous system one. Fact 61. The Freddy Fazbear mask used in FNAF 2 to fool the animatronics into thinking the player is one of them. The animatronics apparently have the same visual recognition limitations as the mangle. They can't tell the difference between a human face and a plastic Freddy mask in dim lighting. This vulnerability is both a gameplay mechanic and a character insight. They're not sophisticated machines. They're old, poorly maintained, and haunted by grief. Their perception of the world is damaged and fragmented, and that damage is what the player exploits to survive. Fact 62. The mangle, one of the animatronics in FNAF 2, is a deconstructed version of Toy Foxy, apparently the result of small children tearing the animatronic apart repeatedly during take-apart and put-together sessions, until the staff gave up reassembling it and just left it suspended from the ceiling as a display piece. The mangle is a tangled mass of white and pink parts with exposed endoskeleton segments and two heads. It crawls through vents and emits a radio frequency signal when it reaches the office. The backstory of the mangle, an animatronic too broken to function but too stubborn to be scrapped, reads almost as a metaphor. Fact 63. Golden Freddy in the original game can be triggered by setting the monitor to the West Hall corner camera and then lowering it. A golden version of Freddy appears in the office, staring forward, and if the player fails to respond correctly, the game crashes to desktop with a unique image rather than a conventional jump scare. This Easter egg was one of the earliest signs that FNAF had secrets and layers beneath its surface mechanics, and it sparked an enormous amount of early community investigation. The crash to desktop was alarming the first time it happened. It felt like something had broken through the game itself. Fact 64. The "It's Me" text that appears periodically in the FNAF games, flashing across hallucination screens and hidden in certain environmental images, is one of the franchise's most enduring and unsettling motifs. The phrase appears to be directed at the player character from one of the animatronics, and its meaning has been interpreted in multiple ways. Some read it as a recognition. The animatronic recognizes the guard as somehow connected to the children. Others read it as a statement of identity, the animatronic asserting that there is a person inside, not a machine. Both interpretations are valid, and the ambiguity is almost certainly intentional. Fact 65. The endoskeleton in the FNAF universe is the internal mechanical skeleton that sits inside each animatronic suit. The endoskeleton has its own visual design: thin, exposed, humanoid, and when an animatronic is stripped of its suit, the endoskeleton beneath is deeply unsettling in its own right. The franchise draws on the specific horror of seeing the inside of a thing that is designed to look alive from the outside. The gap between the cheerful exterior and the cold mechanical truth beneath is a visual representation of the franchise's broader themes about the nature of performance, deception, and the hollow structures that institutions build around the truth. Fact 66. Withered Bonnie in FNAF 2 is missing his face entirely, exposing the endoskeleton beneath with wires dangling from the empty face socket. This design choice, creating an animatronic whose face is just gone, replaced with an empty cavity, is considered one of the most effective and upsetting visual designs in the franchise. There's something specific about a face-shaped absence that is more disturbing than any monstrous face could be. The eye sockets with no eyes, the jaw hinges with no jaw, the dark interior of a skull-shaped hole in what used to be an animatronic rabbit are all components of an image that lodges itself in memory. Fact 67. Phantom animatronics appear throughout FNAF 3 as hallucinations, transparent, damaged versions of previous animatronics that flicker into the night guard's vision and cause momentary distractions. They cannot directly harm the player, but their appearances are startling and disruptive. The phantom animatronics represent the psychological toll of working in a location saturated with the residue of genuine tragedy. The night guard in FNAF 3 isn't just contending with Springtrap, they're contending with a building that has been soaked in suffering, and their own mind is beginning to reflect that soaking back at them. Fact 68. The FNAF 3 map shows a remarkably small location. Fazbear's Fright is clearly a converted industrial space, not a polished attraction. The scares in the haunted house are mostly just animatronic heads mounted on walls and old props dragged out of storage. This lo-fi quality is actually scarier than a polished professional haunted attraction would be. It suggests that the people who built this place didn't have the budget or the expertise to know what they were dealing with. They found pieces of what they thought was just old corporate kitsch. They had no idea that some of those pieces still contained something that was very much awake. Fact 69. The Night 5 phone call in FNAF 3, which is a recorded message rather than a live call, appears to be from the original phone guy of the first game, recorded long before the events of FNAF 3 and played back in a building that has become a monument to the horror it represents. Hearing the phone guy's voice again in this context, chipper, bureaucratic, utterly ignorant of what will eventually happen, is genuinely haunting. It's the voice of institutional normalcy echoing through a building dedicated to its aftermath. Fact 70. Fredbear's Family Diner is the original Fazbear restaurant, the earliest iteration of the business before it expanded into multiple locations. It featured only 2 animatronics, Fredbear, a golden bear, and Spring Bonnie, a golden rabbit. These were the original Springlock suits, the ones designed to be worn by human performers. Fredbear's Family Diner exists at the very beginning of the chronological timeline and at the very beginning of the tragedy, since it's the location where the crying child's fatal accident occurred and where William Afton's career and corruption likely began. Fact 71. The lore suggests that William Afton used the Spring Bonnie suit himself during the initial murders of children at Fredbear's Family Diner. He would dress as the character, earn the children's trust, and then lead them somewhere private. The idea that a man used a beloved children's character as a tool for predation is the most deliberately real-world horror in the franchise. It draws on a documented pattern of predatory behavior rather than pure supernatural invention. Scott placed this element at the foundation of the mythology, which suggests he understood that the most effective horror is always the kind that reflects something true. Fact 72. The Fredbear plush in FNAF 4 is a small golden bear toy that the crying child carries with him throughout the minigames. It appears to speak to him, reassuring him, telling him it's okay, in a way that nobody else can see or hear. This detail, the child confiding in a small stuffed animal that may or may not be communicating back, is one of the most quietly tender moments in the franchise. It also introduces the question of whether the plush is a genuine supernatural presence or simply the child's imagination giving form to the comfort he desperately needs. Both possibilities are devastating in different ways. Fact 73. Nightmare Fredbear, the primary antagonist of FNAF 4, is the distorted nightmare version of Fredbear, the character associated with the crying child's death. His appearance in the child's nightmares is the direct processing of that trauma. He is enormous, jagged, covered in teeth, with additional sets of teeth inside his body, and shadows that seem to extend beyond his physical form. He represents what the child fears most, which is also the thing that killed him. And the fact that the child spends 6 nights facing this fear alone in the dark speaks to a kind of psychological endurance that is both admirable and heartbreaking. Fact 74. Nightmare Bonnie and Nightmare Chica, the other primary nightmare animatronics in FNAF 4, also carry a specific detail worth noting. Their designs include secondary heads, smaller animatronic heads visible inside or protruding from their bodies in places that don't make biological or mechanical sense. These heads look like the original Freddy head, suggesting that even within the nightmare, the image of Freddy is inescapable. It's as if the entire nightmare is built around a single central trauma, and everything in it somehow leads back to the same golden face. Fact 75. Jacko Bonnie and Jacko Chica are Halloween variant animatronics introduced in the FNAF 4 Halloween DLC, featuring glowing orange pumpkin aesthetics overlaid on the standard nightmare designs. These characters have no in-universe lore significance. They were purely aesthetic seasonal additions, but their visual design is striking enough that they've persisted as fan favorites. The idea of nightmare animatronics with additional Halloween flavor layers speaks to the franchise's comfort with aesthetic experimentation, even within its darkest material. Fact 76. Nightmare, also known as Nightmare Fredbear's shadow version, appears only in FNAF 4's 7th Night Unlockable Challenge. It's an entirely black animatronic, a void in the shape of Fredbear, with only white eyes and teeth visible in the darkness. It represents the deepest, most undifferentiated level of fear, not a specific shape of horror, but pure darkness given temporary form. The choice to make the most extreme version of the nightmare something formless and colorless, rather than something elaborately designed, was a sophisticated one. The imagination fills in what the eyes cannot see. Fact 77. The FNAF 4 minigames are unique in that they are the only minigames in the franchise where you play as the victim, rather than the perpetrator or an observer. You navigate a world from the crying child's perspective, visiting locations that should be familiar and comforting, home, friends' houses, the restaurant, but experience them through the lens of a child who is genuinely afraid. The world feels hostile not because it is, objectively, a dangerous place, but because the child's interior experience has made it one. That distinction between objective danger and subjective terror is one the franchise handles with surprising sophistication. Fact 78. Sister Location's Custom Night, released separately as a free DLC, features voice lines from Circus Baby that have become some of the most quoted lines in the franchise. Baby's monologue about the night she captured Elizabeth Afton, describing it with fascinated, almost wondering detachment, is written and performed in a way that captures something genuinely disturbing about characters whose relationship with harm is clinical rather than emotional. She doesn't feel guilt. She doesn't feel horror. She describes the worst moment of her existence as if it were a fascinating memory rather than a catastrophe. Fact 79. The lore surrounding Funtime Freddy and his puppet Bonbon in Sister Location adds comic texture to an otherwise relentlessly grim narrative. Funtime Freddy is a bombastic, theatrical character who seems designed to be a funhouse version of classic Freddy, louder, more dramatic, more explicitly dangerous. His relationship with Bonbon, the small rabbit hand puppet attached to his arm, feels almost like a comedy duo at times, which makes the moments when he turns genuinely threatening more jarring. The tonal contrast is intentional. The franchise has always used cheerfulness as a knife. Fact 80. Ballora, The ballerina animatronic in Sister Location is one of the franchise's most elegantly designed characters. She moves with deliberate grace, using sound rather than sight to hunt. If the player makes noise, she's drawn to it. Her eyes are permanently closed in her resting state, which creates a specific kind of horror, a creature that cannot see but can absolutely hear you. Her associated music, Ballora's music box theme, is genuinely haunting in the musical sense of the word. A waltz played in a minor key that suggests something beautiful in the wrong context. The contrast between her graceful design and her purpose is deeply effective. Fact 81. Baby's Entertainment and Rental, the company that runs the location in Sister Location, is described as a private rental service rather than a public-facing restaurant. The implication is that the Funtime animatronics were available to rent for private parties and events, a concept that becomes increasingly disturbing when you learn that they were designed by William Afton specifically to capture children. The idea of bringing these animatronics to a private location, away from public scrutiny, where they are alone with children, is the franchise's most explicit engagement with real-world predatory infrastructure. Fact 82. The Exotic Butters screen in Sister Location, in which the player completes the game on the private room ending and is rewarded with an image of a buttered bread display accompanied by cheerful music, is one of the most beloved and absurd jokes in the franchise. It appeared completely without warning at the end of a deeply unsettling horror game, and the community's reaction to it was both confusion and delight. Exotic Butters has become a meme, a mascot, and a symbol of the FNAF community's ability to find humor in the middle of darkness. Fact 83. Henry Emily's design and demeanor in Pizzeria Simulator, glimpsed only through audio and environmental storytelling, presents him as a man who has been planning the events of that game for a very long time. The evidence suggests he built the Pizzeria Simulator game within a game specifically, set up Michael as the manager, and spent months preparing a trap designed to draw in every remaining haunted animatronic. This level of patient, long-term planning, grief channeled into meticulous preparation over years, is a kind of tragedy in itself. Henry has been living with this plan while living with his loss. Fact 84. The animatronics salvaged during Pizzeria Simulator, Molten Freddy, Scrap Trap, Scrap Baby, and Lefty, are all deeply degraded versions of characters the player already knows. Molten Freddy is what remains of Ennard after the Afton children rejected it, a collapsed mass of cables and parts. Scrap Trap is William Afton, barely recognizable as having ever been Springtrap. Scrap Baby is Elizabeth Afton, redesigned after being ejected from Ennard. Lefty is the puppet, trapped in a specialized containment unit built by Henry to bring his daughter to the final resting place. Each salvage in the game is the player unknowingly completing Henry's plan. Fact 85. The name Lefty is an acronym that reveals the true purpose of that specific animatronic. Lure, encapsulate, fuse, transport, extract. Every letter maps to a step in the process of safely collecting the puppet and bringing her to the pizzeria. Henry built this animatronic and sent it out specifically to find his daughter. The fact that this information is hidden in an acronym that most players would never decode on their own is characteristic of the franchise's approach to storytelling. The most important reveals are given to those who look hardest. Fact 86. The FNAF timeline has been described even by dedicated fans as deliberately obtuse, a phrase that is simultaneously a criticism and a compliment. The games are not released in chronological order. They do not explicitly announce their place in the timeline, and they frequently introduce new information that requires significant recontextualization of what was already known. This structure, which could have been a flaw, has instead become one of the franchise's greatest strengths. It creates a puzzle community, a culture of collaborative analysis, and an ongoing relationship between creator and audience that spans years rather than the typical life cycle of a game. Fact 87. The canonical FNAF timeline, as best as the community has been able to reconstruct it, begins with Fredbear's Family Diner in the late 1970s or early 1980s, runs through multiple restaurant openings and closings, through the events of the numbered games, through Sister Location, through Pizzeria Simulator, through the digital age of Help Wanted, and security breach, and into the ruined aftermath of the Ruined DLC. The full span of the narrative covers roughly 40 years of in-universe history, which is an extraordinary breadth for a franchise that originated as a single indie horror game about surviving 5 nights. Fact 88. FNAF Help Wanted 2, released in December 2023, continued the VR anthology format of the original while expanding the universe's lore through new minigames and audio logs. The game explores the history of animatronic technology and the corporate culture of Fazbear Entertainment in new ways, filling in gaps in the franchise's mythology and continuing the thread of Glitchtrap's influence on digital media. The continuation of the Help Wanted line suggests that the franchise is committed to treating the VR entries as a legitimate narrative branch rather than a standalone experiment. Fact 89. The FNAF franchise has inspired an enormous body of academic analysis. Essays, video essays, and academic papers have been written about the franchise's themes of corporate negligence, childhood trauma, grief, and the nature of consciousness in non-human entities. The franchise has been taught in university courses on game design and narrative, cited in studies on horror media psychology, and discussed in philosophical contexts related to questions of identity, memory, and what constitutes a person. None of this was anticipated when Scott Cawthon uploaded a jump scare game about pizza robots in 2014. It is an extraordinary accidental achievement. Fact 90. The children who were murdered by William Afton and whose souls inhabit the animatronics are never named explicitly in the main games, which is one of the franchise's most deliberate and affecting omissions. They are anonymous victims, not because they don't matter, but because the franchise understands that the erasure of their names by the people and institutions that should have protected them is part of the horror. When the community named them Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, Cassidy, it felt like an act of restoration as much as theory crafting. The names, giving them names, matters. Fact 91. The 5 missing children in the original game's context are represented by 5 gravestones in the death minigame accessible on Night 4. The minigame shows the player character approaching each grave and having a small gift appear above it, which the ghost children react to. This minigame was one of the earliest examples of the franchise using pixel art, not just for gameplay but for emotional communication. The image of someone leaving gifts at children's graves is culturally universal in its grief, and its placement in a horror video game gave it a resonance that surprised many players. Fact 92. Phone Guy's Night 1 call in the original FNAF has been analysed obsessively by the fan community. Its cheerful delivery, corporate phrasing, and strategic vagueness mask an enormous amount of information. The phrase, "The animatronics have been known to get a bit quirky at night," is doing extraordinary rhetorical work. Quirky is the most carefully chosen minimization of the concept of possessed animatronics attempting to kill the night guard that the English language could probably provide. The entire phone call is a study in institutional language, the kind of language that acknowledges just enough to technically inform while refusing to communicate anything that would lead to appropriate action. Fact 93. One of the most discussed atmospheric details in the original FNAF is the presence of Bonnie's guitar as a recurring environmental prop. Bonnie is defined by his guitar in the same way Chica is defined by her cupcake and Foxy by his hook. These accessories are character-defining objects that ground each animatronic in a specific identity. But in the original game's darker moments, those accessories take on a different quality. A guitar lying in the dark of an empty hallway is an object that implies a presence that is no longer there. And in FNAF, an absent animatronic is often more dangerous than a visible one. Fact 94. Mr. Hippo, one of the mediocre Melodies animatronics in Pizzeria Simulator, and later a significant presence in Ultimate Custom Night, delivers lengthy philosophical monologues during death sequences in UCN. These monologues, delivered in a slow, thoughtful voice while the player stares at a game-over screen, cover topics including the nature of existence, the meaning of suffering, and the importance of accepting things one cannot change. They are gently, almost tenderly written, and their placement in Ultimate Custom Night, which is canonically William Afton's hell, suggests they are part of the torment rather than a reprieve. Being lectured on acceptance by an animatronic hippopotamus while you are damned is, objectively, the most FNAF thing in the franchise. Fact 95. The Midnight Motorist minigame in Pizzeria Simulator is one of the most debated and unresolved pieces of lore in the franchise. The minigame depicts a figure driving at night, arriving home, discovering that someone has escaped through a bedroom window, and visiting a location in the woods where footprints suggest someone has been regularly spending time. The identity of the driver, the identity of the person who escaped, and the identity of whatever is in the woods have been the subject of years of analysis. The most widely accepted interpretation involves the Afton family, but nothing has been definitively confirmed, which means the minigame continues to generate new angles of investigation. Fact 96. The lore of FNAF is distributed across a remarkably wide variety of media. Main games, spin-off games, DLC minigames, phone calls, newspaper clippings, in-game books, out-of-game novels, graphic novels, merchandise descriptions, and official merchandise items that occasionally contain lore-relevant text. This distribution means that no single medium contains the whole picture, and that constructing the fullest possible understanding of the universe requires engagement across almost all of them. This breadth has been criticized as inaccessible and celebrated as ambitious, and it is genuinely both of those things simultaneously. Fact 97. The FNAF Fazbear Frights Anthology series, published beginning in 2019, consists of horror short stories set in the FNAF universe. These stories range from atmospheric dread to outright body horror, from character studies to supernatural mystery, and they explore corners of the franchise's world that the games don't have time or format to reach. Some of them contain significant lore revelations, delivered in narrative form rather than environmental discovery, which represents a different mode of storytelling for a franchise that had previously relied almost entirely on showing rather than telling. Fact 98. The Fazbear Frights stories introduce the concept of the agony, a more specific form of remnant tied to extremely intense suffering. Agony, unlike ordinary remnant, can be harnessed and weaponized, and the stories suggest that certain locations and objects can become saturated with agony to the point where they begin affecting people who interact with them. This concept expands the franchise's metaphysics beyond individual possessions and hauntings into something more ambient and environmental. It suggests that the history of a place has weight, that violence leaves a residue that persists and spreads. Fact 99. The FNAF franchise has addressed the theme of parental failure more consistently than almost any other horror franchise. William Afton is a father who kills other people's children and whose own children die because of his actions. Henry Emily is a father who lost his daughter and spent the rest of his life trying to give her peace. The FNAF 4 father, glimpsed briefly in the minigames, appears absent or neglectful toward the crying child, who is clearly suffering. Even in Security Breach, Gregory is an unaccompanied child in a massive commercial building, presumably without reliable adults in his life. The franchise is relentlessly interested in what happens to children when the adults who are supposed to protect them don't. Fact 100. We've hit 100 facts. You've made it a third of the way through, and there is so much more waiting for you ahead. More lore, more history, more secrets, and more of the astonishing detail that Scott Cawthon and the teams that followed him have woven into one of the most surprising and emotionally complex horror universes ever created. Stay with me. We're just getting to the good part. Fact 101. The name Fazbear has never been canonically explained in terms of its origin. Freddy Fazbear is named after the company, or the company is named after Freddy Fazbear, but the word itself, Fazbear, is a piece of invented language that has become so embedded in gaming culture that it feels like it must mean something. It doesn't. Or if it does, Scott Cawthon hasn't told anyone. This is one of the smallest mysteries in the franchise, but it persists with quiet stubbornness alongside all the larger ones. Fact 102. The original game's difficulty curve across the 5 nights was very deliberately calibrated. Night 1 is intentionally easy enough to survive comfortably, designed to give the player a false sense of capability before ramping up exponentially. By Night 4 and Night 5, the animatronics are aggressive enough that survival requires near constant attention and stress management. Night 6, the optional extra night, and Night 7, the custom night, push difficulty to levels that most players found unreasonably punishing. The difficulty was part of the narrative. Fazbear Entertainment would not have paid $120 a week for a job that was easy. Fact 103. The kitchen is one of the most famous and deliberately unexplored locations in the original FNAF. The cameras show every room in the restaurant, except the kitchen. There is a kitchen camera feed, but it shows nothing but static. All you can hear is Chica's sounds coming from that direction. The fact that the game deliberately refuses to show you the kitchen is one of its most effective decisions. The imagination populates that static with far worse things than the designers could have drawn. Not showing you is the cruelest possible move. Fact 104. The animatronic named RWQF-SFASXC, commonly called Shadow Bonnie or RXQ by the fan community, is one of the more enigmatic characters in the franchise. Appearing as a dark purple or black silhouette of Toy Bonnie in FNAF 2 and as a shadow form in subsequent games, Shadow Bonnie's nature and purpose remain one of the franchise's more genuinely open questions. Its appearances are brief, its behavior is inconsistent with other animatronics, and no in-game document or phone call ever acknowledges it. Shadow Bonnie feels less like a character and more like an intrusion, something that shouldn't be there, appearing anyway and leaving no explanation behind. Fact 105. Shadow Freddy, a similarly dark and undefined figure, appears in the FNAF 3 minigames specifically to lure the withered animatronics to the back room where Purple Guy destroys them. The fact that a shadow entity serves as an instrument of the villain's plan, whether willingly or unknowingly, adds a layer of interpretive complication. Are the shadow entities part of William's plan? Are they independent agents? Are they the remnant of something even older and more damaged than the other animatronics? The franchise has left these questions unanswered, which is either tantalizing or frustrating depending on how tolerant you are of irresolution. Fact 106. The You Can't secret in FNAF 3 is triggered by clicking on the word Save Them repeatedly in the minigame section, until it changes to You Can't. This hidden message, addressed directly to the player, is a statement of futility. No matter what the player does in the minigames, the children were already killed long before the events of FNAF 3. The words are an acknowledgement that the player's retrospective journey through the lore is, in one sense, the experience of discovering a tragedy that couldn't be prevented. The franchise is full of horrors, but this particular one is a specifically human kind. The horror of learning what happened too late to change it. Fact 107. The music box in FNAF 2, which must be constantly rewound to prevent the puppet from emerging, plays My Grandfather's Clock, a Victorian-era song about a grandfather clock that stops at the exact moment its owner dies. The choice of this specific song is not accidental. The music box is keeping something contained through continuous effort. As long as the music plays, the puppet stays inside. The moment the music stops, the thing that was being held back comes out. My Grandfather's Clock is a song about time running out, about a mechanism that stops when a life does. It's an exquisitely fitting choice for a countdown mechanic with fatal consequences. Fact 108. The lullaby associated with the puppet in later games. Toreador March from Bizet's Carmen is associated with Freddy, but the puppet gets its own variations of music box melodies, has been analysed extensively for emotional subtext. Music in the FNAF franchise is never chosen carelessly. Each character's associated musical themes reflect something about their personality, history, or function. The puppet's melodies tend towards slower, more melancholic registers, which suits a character who is simultaneously a guardian, a victim, and a prisoner. Fact 109. FNA World, released in January 2016, was a cheerful RPG spin-off featuring all of the franchise's characters in a colourful, cartoonish adventure. It was critically mauled, and Scott Cawthon actually pulled it from sale temporarily after the negative reception before re-releasing it for free. Despite being a departure from the horror of the main series, FNAF World contains significant lore significance. Its deeper secrets and fourth wall breaking elements establish the concept of a larger, meta-level narrative operating above and beneath the main games. FNAF World was dismissed as a misfired experiment at the time, but its lore contributions have been re-evaluated significantly in retrospect. Fact 110. The fourth wall breaking elements of FNAF World, where certain areas of the game contain references to the real world outside the game, and where characters explicitly address the idea of being inside a video game, prefigured the meta-narrative threads that the franchise would explore more deeply in later entries, particularly Help Wanted. The idea that the franchise has a relationship with its own fictionality, that it is aware it is a video game, that its characters are aware they are characters, adds a layer of conceptual complexity that moves the narrative beyond horror and into something closer to philosophical fiction. Fact 111. The Lawkeeper, ending in FNAF World, achieved by finding and decoding hidden messages throughout the game, revealed coordinates to a real-world location in Utah that, when visited, contained buried treasure related to the franchise. This was one of Scott Cawthon's genuine real-world ARG elements, a moment where the game spilled into reality in a concrete and literal way. The discovery of the treasure generated enormous excitement in the fan community and demonstrated Scott's willingness to engage with his audience across the boundary between the game world and the physical one. Fact 112. The concept of spring lock failures is described with enough technical detail in FNAF's lore to constitute a coherent mechanical explanation for one of the series' central horrors. Spring lock suits required careful maintenance. Specifically, they could not be used in environments with high humidity because moisture would cause the internal spring mechanisms to slip and release. The phone guy's warning in FNAF 1 about not getting the suits near any liquid is the single most practically useful piece of information he delivers. And the fact that nobody followed this advice explains a significant portion of the franchise's body count. Fact 113. The FNAF lore has a recurring theme of things that should be retired being kept in service. The original animatronics in FNAF 2 should have been scrapped. They're non-functional, deteriorated, and clearly disturbing, but Fazbear Entertainment keeps them in the back room rather than disposing of them, partially for cost reasons, and partially because there are legal complications around their disposal. This institutional inability to let go of things that should be gone, to properly end things, to fully close locations and destroy equipment, is both a corporate failure and a narrative metaphor. The franchise is full of things that refuse to stop. Fact 114. The role of the security guard across the franchise is one of the more fascinating through lines. In multiple games, the player character is a security guard at a Fazbear location, low-paid, under-resourced, equipped with barely functional tools, and dealing with a situation that management knows is abnormal, but refuses to address honestly. The security guard archetype in FNAF is the person the institution uses as a buffer between its secrets and the public. Someone disposable enough to put in the path of the problem without concern for what happens to them. It's a portrait of institutional exploitation that resonates beyond the supernatural context. Fact 115. The lore behind Circus Baby's ice cream capture of Elizabeth Afton is described in a security logbook that came with special editions of FNAF Sister Location. The logbook, intended to resemble an actual Fazbear Entertainment document, contained handwritten annotations from an unnamed character, believed to be Michael Afton, responding to official documents with unofficial observations. These annotations provided lore through the act of an in-universe person reading and reacting to official records, which is a particularly elegant storytelling device. The handwriting in the logbook is itself a characterization tool. Fact 116. The FNAF franchise introduced the concept of remnant injection. The idea that remnant could be physically extracted from animatronics and injected into humans or other materials. This concept was explored in the Fazbear Fright stories and suggests that William Afton was not merely studying the supernatural phenomenon of soul possession, but actively attempting to industrialize it. He wanted to be able to harvest, store, and deploy remnant the way a pharmaceutical company handles a chemical compound. The transformation of spiritual grief into a product is one of the more unsettling ideas in the franchise. Fact 117. The Fazbear Entertainment Corporation is portrayed throughout the franchise as an institution defined by the gap between its public presentation and its private knowledge. Publicly, it is a family entertainment company with a cheerful brand and a long history of bringing joy to children. Privately, it has covered up murders, ignored known dangers, rehired known killers, continued operating locations that were sites of documented tragedy, and repeatedly prioritized brand protection over human safety. This portrait of a corporation that knows exactly what it is doing and simply continues, because the PR cost of acknowledgement is higher than the human cost of silence, is recognizably realistic in ways that elevate it beyond genre horror. Fact 118. The glamrock animatronics in Security Breach, Freddy, Chica, Roxanne Wolf, and Montgomery Gator, are a different kind of character from any previous FNAF animatronics. They exist in a world of 2020s nostalgia for 1980s excess, styled as glam rock and stadium rock archetypes, built for a generation of children who consume music through streaming platforms and social media. Their cheerful, performative personalities are calibrated for that specific cultural moment. And yet the same horror infrastructure is waiting underneath. The specific surface details of each era have changed. The institution beneath them hasn't. Fact 119. Roxanne Wolf in Security Breach has a storyline focused on her relationship with her own perceived inadequacy. Her defeat animations and in-game audio logs reveal a character obsessed with her own greatness and terrified of being seen as anything less. When Gregory damages her eyes in a confrontation, her reaction is less rage and more devastation. A character built around the performance of confidence falling apart when her ability to be seen is compromised is a psychologically interesting design choice for an animatronic wolf in a horror game. And it's the kind of subtle characterization that distinguishes Security Breach from the simpler entries. Fact 120. Montgomery Gator, Monty, is the most aggressively designed of the glamrock animatronics. All shoulder pads, dark glasses, and swagger. His character archetype is the rockstar bravado type, confident to the point of arrogance, physically imposing in a way the others aren't. His gameplay section in Security Breach requires the player to directly confront him in a way that the other animatronic sections don't, which suits his character. He's the one you have to go through, not around. The design team clearly enjoyed building a character who is less a mystery than a force of nature. Fact 121. Glamrock Chica's storyline in Security Breach involves her being drawn away from the stage by food, a callback to the original Chica's association with eating and kitchens that has been consistent across every version of the character. She follows a pizza trail into an area of the Pizzaplex and gets corrupted by Glitch Trap's influence in the process, and the mechanism for her corruption, her simple persistent compulsion toward food, is played as both characterization and vulnerability. Her weakness is the thing that makes her Chica, and exploiting it requires the player to leverage her most defining trait against her. Fact 122. The Pizzaplex in Security Breach is designed with an extraordinary level of architectural detail that rewards exploration. It contains a bowling alley, an atrium, multiple performance stages, a daycare, a Roxy Raceway, a Monty Golf section, retail spaces, backstage areas, and a basement laboratory complex. The sheer scale of the building communicates the specific kind of mega-commercial excess associated with the 2010s and 2020s concept of experiential retail. The idea that an entertainment venue should be so large and so comprehensive that visitors never have to leave. The Pizzaplex takes that concept to its logical extreme and then populates it with things that want you dead. Fact 123. Sun and Moon, the daycare attendant in Security Breach, is one of the fan community's most beloved characters, a split-personality animatronic who behaves as a cheerful, energetic caretaker in lighted conditions and transforms into a slow, hunting predator when the lights go out. The visual design of both sides is extraordinary. Sun with his bright yellow sunburst face, and Moon with his dark half-masked face, suggesting an eclipse, and the contrast between the two personas is used for both humor and horror throughout the game. The daycare attendant has generated enormous amounts of fan art and fan fiction, more than perhaps any other character introduced in Security Breach. Fact 124. The design philosophy behind the glamrock animatronics in Security Breach was informed by the visual language of stadium concerts and music video aesthetics. Bright colors, dramatic lighting, exaggerated costume elements. Art director, whoever worked on those designs, understood that making the animatronics feel like celebrities rather than mascots would change the player's relationship with them. Celebrities are already a kind of performance of a persona, already something constructed and maintained rather than natural. And making the animatronics feel celebrity-coded makes the horror of discovering what's underneath that performance hit differently. Fact 125. Gregory, the child protagonist of Security Breach, is unique in the franchise for being an active, mobile protagonist rather than a stationary observer. Previous player characters were pinned to chairs or security desks, interacting with their environments through monitors and doors. Gregory runs, hides, climbs, and explores, and this physical engagement with the space changes the horror from claustrophobic to expansive. The Pizzaplex doesn't feel like a place where you're trapped at a desk. It feels like a place where you're genuinely lost, which is a different, and in some ways more existentially unsettling kind of fear. Fact 126. The identity and backstory of Gregory in Security Breach has been deliberately obscured. He appears to be a child who lives in the Pizzaplex, without parental figures, possibly homeless. The Ruin DLC storyline suggests his relationship with the Pizzaplex and with Freddy is more complicated than initially apparent, and theories about his origins range from the straightforward, an abandoned child, to the elaborate, a digital copy, a remnant constructed entity, a child created by the same processes that created Charlie Emily. The franchise appears to be building toward a revelation about Gregory, and what that revelation might be has been one of the fan community's most active areas of speculation. Fact 127. Cassie, the protagonist of Security Breach Ruin, is introduced as Gregory's friend who enters the devastated Pizzaplex to find him. Her personality is established quickly. She's brave in a specific way that feels genuinely childlike, willing to go places that adults would sensibly avoid because the map says her friend might be there, and she doesn't have the calculus yet for correctly assessing risk. Her dynamic with the Mimic, which communicates through Gregory's old radio to manipulate her movements, is one of the darker aspects of the DLC, a child being guided through danger by something that has learned to sound like her friend. Fact 128. The FNAF Security Breach Ruin DLC recontextualizes a significant amount of what Security Breach established. The multiple endings of the base game, which many players had interpreted as alternative possibilities, are reconfigured by Ruin into a more specific canonical timeline. The collapsed, devastated state of the Pizzaplex in Ruin represents a definitive aftermath, something that happened, not something that might happen. This narrative commitment to a specific outcome after a game deliberately structured around multiple possibilities is a bold storytelling decision, and the fan community's reaction to it has been thoughtful and ongoing. Fact 129. The Mimic in Ruin's role as both a physical threat and a communications adversary creates a specific kind of horror that is relatively new for the franchise. The horror of a trusted voice being wrong. For most of the DLC, Cassie believes she is being guided by Gregory. She has no reason to doubt the voice in the radio. The process by which the player begins to suspect that something is wrong before Cassie does creates dramatic irony that is genuinely uncomfortable to sit with, because every instruction the voice gives sends the child further into danger, and she follows willingly because she trusts it. Fact 130. The franchise's treatment of grief is one of its most consistent and underappreciated themes. Almost every character in the FNAF universe is defined by grief in one form or another. The animatronics are grief made physical and dangerous. Henry Emily is grief made purposeful and ultimately sacrificial. William Afton is grief's complete absence made predatory. Even Michael Afton's entire arc can be read as a grief response, a son trying to undo his family's legacy of harm because he can't undo the harm he personally caused. The franchise doesn't present grief as something that passes. It presents grief as something that changes form. Fact 131. The concept of a remnant trail, the spiritual wake left by violent events that can be followed like a scent, suggests that in the FNAF universe, history is literally present in physical space. Locations that were sites of violence carry that violence forward in time. The restaurant doesn't just look like a place where bad things happened. It is a place where bad things are still happening, in a different register. This idea that tragedy doesn't just end but continues in a different mode is one of the more philosophically substantial ideas the franchise has ever engaged with. Fact 132. The Spring Bonnie suit, the one used by William Afton during his murders, and eventually the one he dies inside, appears in the franchise lore earlier than most fans initially realized. It was used for public performances at Fredbear's Family Diner. It was a beloved children's character before it became a murder weapon and before it became a tomb. The full arc of the Spring Bonnie suit, from cheerful entertainment icon to instrument of predation to the thing that kills its wearer, is one of the more complete and disturbing object narratives in the franchise. Fact 133. The idea that every FNAF location was eventually closed, Fredbear's Family Diner, the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, the FNAF 2 location, Fazbear's Fright, sister location, the FNAF 6 restaurant, and ultimately the Pizzaplex, creates a pattern of institutional failure that recurs regardless of the specific form the institution takes. New buildings, new animatronics, new corporate strategies, new staff. The same outcome. Closure. This cycle suggests not a string of bad luck or individual failures, but something structural. Something in the design of the institution itself that makes catastrophe inevitable. Fact 134. The Fazbear Entertainment jingle, the cheerful musical sting associated with the franchise's fictional corporate identity, appears throughout the games as a kind of tonal intrusion, cheerfulness inserting itself into darkness, the brand announcing itself in spaces where branding is deeply inappropriate. The jingle's persistence through disaster and horror is a very specific kind of corporate horror. The logo on the wall while the building burns, the brand promise continuing to play while the institution it represents collapses. It's the most mundane and recognizable kind of horror in the franchise, which is perhaps why it works so reliably. Fact 135. The franchise's approach to exposition is one of its defining characteristics. The main games essentially never explain themselves. There are no cutscenes, no opening narration, no character who sits down and explains the history of the restaurant. Everything is environmental, peripheral, or actively hidden. This approach respects the player's intelligence and their patience for mystery, and it assumes an audience willing to do work. Not many horror franchises have trusted their audience so completely, and the trust has been repaid with an unusual depth of community investment. Fact 136. The Sevatem message visible in the FNAF 2 minigame, written in blood on the walls by one of the animatronics, is one of the most striking pieces of in-universe communication in the franchise. The animatronics are aware that they need to be freed. They know they are trapped. They know there is a them that needs saving, but the message is written in a medium that no one in the restaurant environment would take seriously, in a context where the person who might see it would be too afraid to do anything about it. The message is accurate and completely useless, a trapped thing speaking in a language that no one will hear. Fact 137. The crying child of FNAF 4. The crying ghost children in various mini-games, the idea of Elizabeth Afton weeping inside baby, runs throughout the franchise as a consistent image of helplessness and loss. Children crying in the FNAF universe are almost always crying in response to things that adults have done or failed to prevent. The franchise's most consistent emotional stance is one of sorrow for what happens to children when the systems designed to protect them fail or are actively turned against them. Fact 138. Toy Freddy in FNAF 2 is unique among the toy animatronics, in that his final approach to the player's office is telegraphed through camera footage showing him leaving his starting position and gradually getting closer. Watching him on the cameras, this cheerful, rounded, big-eyed version of Freddy Fazbear getting up from his seat and moving toward you over the course of the night is a slow-burn horror experience that contrasts with the sudden frights of most animatronic encounters. He's visible the entire time. You know he's coming. You know exactly where he is. And he keeps getting closer anyway. Fact 139. The FNAF lore has always included a significant amount of information that is technically present in the games, but can only be decoded through external analysis. Spectrograms hidden in audio files, patterns in static that contain images, QR codes hidden in promotional materials. This commitment to hiding information in media beyond the games themselves created a culture of cross-media investigation in the FNAF community that was unprecedented in indie gaming. Fans with skills in audio analysis, steganography, and code breaking were suddenly as important to the lore community as those who were simply good at the games. Fact 140. The spectrogram hidden in the FNAF audio files of early games, revealing images when the audio was run through software, was one of the first and most memorable examples of this transmedia hiding. The image revealed was a face, damaged, distorted, the kind of thing you wouldn't want to find in a sound file, and its discovery created an enormous amount of community excitement and dread simultaneously. It was a communication from the franchise that could only be received by those who were looking in the right places. It felt like the game was testing whether you deserved to know its secrets. Fact 141. The sound of the music box in FNAF 2, the gentle, slightly off-tune music that plays while it's wound, has been described by many players as one of the most anxiety-inducing sounds in gaming when it begins to slow down. The music box slowing isn't dramatic. It isn't accompanied by ominous strings or jump scare preparation. It just gets a little slower, a little more hesitant. And in the absence of dramatic musical signaling, the brain fills in the dread itself. The slowing music box is a perfect anxiety mechanic, precisely because it doesn't try too hard to tell you how to feel about it. Fact 142. The FNAF 2 location introduced minigames triggered by dying, small, pixelated vignettes that played between game over screens and revealed pieces of the missing children incident's backstory. These death minigames were the franchise's first serious experiment with using the failure state as a narrative device. The moment when the player loses control becomes the moment when the story speaks most clearly. Dying in FNAF 2 teaches you something that surviving doesn't. That inversion of the standard game reward structure is one of the franchise's more elegant design decisions. Fact 143. The FNAF 3 minigames are told in reverse chronological order. When experienced in the sequence, they appear across the nights, meaning that the earliest events of the backstory are the last ones the player sees. This reverse ordering creates a narrative structure where the player understands consequences before causes. They see the aftermath before they understand what produced it. By the time the final minigame reveals the spring lock failure that kills William, the player has already seen everything that came before and after, and the moment lands with accumulated weight rather than standalone impact. Fact 144. The character known as Happiest Day, depicted in a minigame accessible through a secret birthday room in FNAF 3, shows a group of ghost children at a birthday party, apparently at peace. This minigame represents the good ending of FNAF 3 in its purest form. Children who were denied their childhoods finally being given a small, symbolic celebration. The image of ghost children in party hats eating birthday cake is simultaneously sweet and deeply sad, and its placement as a hidden good ending, something that must be earned through diligence, makes the sweetness harder and the sadness softer. Fact 145. The lore around Remnant expanded significantly in the Fazbear Fright stories, particularly in those set in more contemporary periods of the franchise timeline. The stories explored the idea of remnant-infused objects, everyday items that had absorbed enough emotional residue to become dangerous. A chair, a coin, a piece of machinery, the idea that tragedy can seep into objects the way moisture seeps into wood, changing them, warping them, making them conduits for something that shouldn't be present, is one of the most ambient horror concepts in the franchise. Fact 146. The Ennard endoskeleton, The amalgamated form of all the Funtime animatronics merged together into a single, shifting, cable-covered mass is one of the most visually striking designs in the franchise. After expelling Michael Afton, Ennard reassembles into a new configuration that the fan community refers to as Molten Freddy, missing the baby components that were reclaimed by Elizabeth's spirit. The sight of an endoskeleton wearing a mask over no face, the mask being the only recognizable element of something that has otherwise become entirely unrecognizable, is a very FNAF way of asking the question of what identity is when everything that gave it shape is gone. Fact 147. The concept of soul remnant being incompatible with certain hosts. Elizabeth Afton's soul, eventually rejecting the Ennard collective and separating back into Scrap Baby, suggests that individual identity in the FNAF universe has a persistence that even forced merging cannot permanently overcome. Elizabeth is still Elizabeth even inside a mass of combined animatronic components. She reasserts herself, takes back her form, and walks out as her own entity. This is either a story about the resilience of individual identity or a story about the horror of identity refusing to dissolve, even when dissolution would be merciful. Possibly both. Fact 148. The Fazbear Fright story, Into the Pit, is one of the most widely loved entries in the anthology series. It follows a child who discovers a ball pit that connects to a version of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in the 1980s, and who interacts with a young, pre-corruption William Afton. The story is disturbing not because it presents William as a monster, he isn't yet, or at least not fully, but because it shows something that looks almost like a person, and invites the reader to see the gap between what he is now and what he once appeared to be. Pre-monstrous villains are often more disturbing than fully formed ones. Fact 149. The visual design philosophy of the FNAF franchise has always leaned heavily on the uncanny valley, the space where human-like constructions are close enough to human to register as almost right, but far enough off to register as deeply wrong. The original animatronics were designed to look like mascots, round, cheerful, exaggerated features. But their proportions are slightly wrong. Their movements are slightly jerky. Their eyes are slightly too still. The newer designs in later games push further into realistic proportions, which sometimes makes them more disturbing rather than less, because the wrongness is easier to place when the right is more precisely defined. Fact 150. Halfway through, 150 facts complete. The thing I find most remarkable about this franchise, and the main reason I made this video, is that a series of jump scare games about possessed pizza robots has generated this much genuine human emotion. The things people feel about FNAF are real feelings. The grief people express for characters who are pixels and polygons is genuine grief. Whatever alchemy Scott Cawthon performed in 2014 when he uploaded that first game, it produced something that connects to real human experiences of loss, guilt, fear, and the need for justice. That connection is what everything in this video is really about. Fact 151. The original FNAF was made on a very small budget, and it shows in specific ways. The textures are flat, the lighting is limited, and the models are clearly the work of a single developer rather than a team. But these limitations are often cited as contributing to the game's horror rather than detracting from it. The cheapness of the environment, the institutional feel of low-resolution textures under fluorescent light, the imperfection of the character models, all of it lends the game a specific kind of low-budget realism that higher production entries in the franchise have sometimes struggled to replicate. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was always supposed to look a little run down. Fact 152. The Easter egg in the original FNAF that allows the player to make Freddy move faster by clicking on his nose in a particular poster is one of the franchise's earliest in-jokes. The poster shows Freddy with a large round nose, and clicking it plays a honking sound. This simple, goofy addition to a horror game established something important about the franchise early. It has a sense of humor about itself, and it will allow players to poke at it literally and figuratively. The honk is the franchise saying, "I'm scary, but I'm not taking myself too seriously, and neither should you." Fact 153. The design of the original Foxy, with his eye patch, his hook hand, his visible endoskeleton through torn suit fabric, and his running sprint attack created an animatronic archetype quite different from the others. Where Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica feel like corrupted entertainment, Foxy feels like something rawer, an attraction that was taken out of service, neglected, and left to deteriorate in the dark of a closed cove. The curtain in front of Pirate's Cove, which the player must occasionally peek behind to check on Foxy's progress, is a perfectly theatrical framing for a character designed around the horror of looking where you know something is waiting. Fact 154. The lore of Pirate's Cove suggests that Foxy's attraction was shut down due to an incident that preceded the events of the first game. Something Foxy did that led to the cove being closed off and Foxy being put out of service. This incident is never specified, and the ambiguity has generated significant fan theorizing. The most commonly accepted interpretation is that the incident was connected to the missing children case, that Foxy was involved in one of the murders in a way that made continued public display of the character impossible. This reading gives Foxy's degraded, out-of-service state an additional layer of tragedy. Fact 155, the Bonnie counterpart, in FNAF 2, Toy Bonnie, is sometimes noted as the character who moves the most aggressively and appears in the office most frequently and unexpectedly. His design, brighter and more stylized than classic Bonnie, contrasts with this aggressive behavior in a way that is more disturbing than if the most frightening animatronic looked frightening. The friendlier something appears, the more the gap between appearance and behavior unsettles. Toy Bonnie looks like a children's toy upgraded for modern tastes. His behavior is anything but toy-like. Fact 156. The concept of the Fazbear Entertainment suits, the animatronic costumes that can be worn by human performers, is one of the more practically grounded horror concepts in the franchise. Real-world costume characters at theme parks and entertainment venues have their own occupational safety concerns, and the image of a performer inside a large, hot, mechanically complex suit is uncomfortable even before the franchise adds spring locks and soul possession to the equation. FNAF's horror often works by taking something that has a real-world, uncomfortable precedent and pushing it one step further into nightmare. Fact 157. The Night Guard in FNAF 3, the player character at Fazbear's Fright, is almost universally identified by the fan community as Michael Afton. This would mean that Michael spent his career as a Fazbear security guard, following the trail of his father's damage from location to location. It would also mean he was in Fazbear's Fright on the night it burned, the fire that in the FNAF 3 bad ending kills everyone inside. Michael's survival of that fire, given that he appears in sister location afterward, either requires that he escaped or that his rotting, reanimated body survived something that should have killed him. Both possibilities are bleak. Fact 158. The withered animatronics in FNAF 2 are described in the phone calls as having been used in the location before the toy animatronics were built, and as having been put in storage when they were deemed too damaged for public display. The fact that they are kept in storage rather than disposed of is explicitly connected to cost cutting. Decommissioning animatronics apparently requires a specific process that the company either can't afford or simply hasn't prioritized. The result is a back room full of deteriorating, barely contained nightmare machinery that the employees treat with the same normalizing language they use for everything else. Fact 159. The newspaper clippings in FNAF 1 that reveal the missing children incident are written in the kind of restrained, journalistic language that makes horror feel more immediate rather than less. The articles don't editorialize, they report facts. Local pizzeria investigated after children go missing. The institutional distance of journalism, the flat affect of factual reporting, applied to an event as horrible as children vanishing from a restaurant, creates a tonal collision that is deeply effective. Horror, reported in a flat voice, hits harder than horror reported in a dramatic one. Fact 160. The Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator's catalog mechanic, in which the player purchases items for the restaurant from a catalog, includes options to buy entertainment elements that subtly reveal the state of the franchise's cultural reputation. The cheapest options are clearly Fazbear-branded material, and the catalog descriptions quietly acknowledge the legal and PR complications surrounding the Fazbear name. This dry corporate humor about a brand associated with the deaths of children trying to rehabilitate itself through better inventory choices is the franchise at its darkest funny. Fact 161. The concept of the immortal and restless section of the FNAF lore. The idea that William Afton's refusal to die is not just supernatural stubbornness, but something encoded into him through his experiments with Remnant, suggests that what he did to himself was irreversible. He designed his own immortality imperfectly as a side effect of his research rather than an achieved goal, and the result is an existence that cannot end but also cannot meaningfully continue. He is not alive in any way that matters. He is not dead in any way that provides relief. He is the franchise's most complete portrait of what happens when someone is defined entirely by refusal. Fact 162. The community theory around the purple guy being multiple people, suggesting that the purple suit worn by the killer in the FNAF 2 minigames might not always represent William Afton, generated years of productive debate before being largely settled by official statements and the novel trilogy's clarifications. The willingness of the community to consider that an apparently simple fact, villain in purple, villain is William, might be more complicated reflects the franchise's track record of revealing that apparent simplicities are not simple at all. Fact 163. The FNAF franchise's relationship with Christianity and Christian symbolism is subtle but consistent. Souls, afterlives, the possibility of rest and peace after death, the concept of something dark and corrupted being finally purified, these are all narrative elements with deep roots in Christian theological thinking. Scott Cawthon's faith is well documented, and while the franchise never evangelizes or makes its theological underpinnings explicit, the shape of the narrative, particularly the FNAF 6 ending, with its tone of final release and peace, reflects a worldview in which suffering has meaning and in which rest is ultimately possible. The franchise's horror is real, but its universe is, in the end, a moral one. Fact 164. The forever element of William Afton's torment in Ultimate Custom Night, the infinity of the simulation, the impossibility of escape, has been interpreted by some fans as the franchise's vision of what genuine moral reckoning might look like. Not death, not punishment in the legal sense. Something more complete, a confrontation with the consequences of one's actions with no limit and no exit. William, who built his entire existence around avoiding consequences, is in a situation where consequence is the only constant. The trap is elegant in its symmetry. Fact 165. The Survival Logbook, a real-world prop book released in 2018, designed to look like a FNAF in-universe document, contains pages filled by an in-universe character believed to be Michael Afton, with handwritten notes and doodles that reveal his state of mind and memories. The logbook received extensive lore analysis from the community with specific attention paid to recurring images, the shadow, the handwriting that seems to repeat certain words involuntarily, the places where text appears that wasn't written by the main hand. It's a document designed to look like one thing and to be another, which is entirely appropriate for this franchise. Fact 166. The franchise's use of color is generally overlooked in favor of its other design choices, but it's deliberate and consistent. Yellow and gold are the colors of Fredbear, of Golden Freddy, of the remnant positive ending states. They signal either something very powerful and dangerous, or something peaceful and resolved. Purple and dark blue are the colors of William Afton, of shadow animatronics, of the spaces between the visible. Blue specifically often indicates sadness or the presence of something spiritually significant. The color vocabulary of the franchise isn't always consistent, but its tendencies are persistent enough to be meaningful. Fact 167. The fandom's development of detailed fan games, non-commercial games created by fans using the FNAF mechanics and aesthetic, has produced a cottage industry of remarkable creative work. Games like One Night at Flumpty's, FNAF Plus, and The Return to Freddy's represent a significant body of fan creation that has, in some cases, been directly acknowledged or celebrated by Scott Cawthon. The franchise's implicit permission for fan creativity It has never aggressively pursued copyright claims against fan-made games that aren't commercial, has contributed to a creative ecosystem that is unusually rich for an indie property. Fact 168. The FNAF Security Breaches Pizzaplex includes a large central atrium with a statue of glam rock Freddy that serves as a landmark and navigation reference point throughout the game. The statue is well rendered, dramatic, and functions as a recurring visual anchor in an otherwise disorienting space. The relationship between Gregory and the statue, returning to it, using it as a safe point, looking up at it, creates a visual shorthand for Gregory's attachment to Freddy himself. The statue is Freddy at his most idealized and symbolic, and Gregory's relationship to that idealized version of his protector reflects his relationship to the real one. Fact 169. The concept of multiple failing locations in the FNAF universe is supported by evidence that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza existed in at least 3 distinct physical locations across the franchise, with each location opening, experiencing incidents, and closing in sequence. The franchise treats each opening as a fresh attempt to get it right. New building, new animatronics, new names sometimes, and each closing as evidence that whatever is wrong cannot be fixed by superficial renewal. The geography of failure in the franchise spans decades and multiple states, suggesting that the problem was never the location. Fact 170. The bite of 87 inches is one of the earliest mysteries introduced in the franchise, mentioned in the FNAF 1 phone guy's call and debated furiously in the early community. The phone guy mentions it offhandedly, saying the animatronics get close and can open and close their mouths, but noting that due to the bite of 87 inches, they no longer have the ability to do so. For years, the identity of the bitten person and the circumstances of the bite were the franchise's most debated mystery. The reveal that the bite of 83, FNAF 4's crushing event, predated this event added chronological complexity, and the identity of the 87 victim was eventually identified in the FNAF 6 content as the FNAF 2-day shift guard, Jeremy Fitzgerald, in the incident referred to in the closing newspaper clipping. Fact 171. The original FNAF has a Night 6 that is unlocked after completing Night 5, and that ends with a paycheck noting termination as the reason for the payment. Mike Schmidt is fired on his 6th night without explanation in the check. No note, no reason beyond that single word. The image of someone being fired by paycheck, without conversation, after surviving 6 nights in a genuinely dangerous workplace, is institutional cold-heartedness expressed with remarkable economy. The termination notice comes in the same communication that pays you, because the company's relationship with you was transactional from the start. Fact 172. The fan-made game Five Nights at Freddy's Plus, developed by Pine Star Studio and commercially released, was specifically authorized by Scott Cawthon as an official reimagining of the original game, with updated graphics and additional depth. The authorization of a fan game as an official release was an unusual move that the community received warmly. It represented a direct line between the fan creative ecosystem and the official franchise, acknowledging that the community's creativity was worthy of formal recognition. Fact 173. The concept of endoskeleton therapy, as depicted in certain Fazbear Fright stories, the idea that animatronic endoskeletons could be modified and used for medical or therapeutic purposes outside the entertainment context, opens up interesting questions about the franchise's broader world. If the technology behind the endoskeletons exists in the real world of the franchise, it implies an entire field of robotics with applications beyond the restaurant setting. The stories that explore this expanded context suggest a world where animatronic technology is more widespread than the restaurant-focused main games acknowledge. Fact 174. The Fazbear Fright story, The Cliffs, one of the darker entries in the anthology series, deals directly with self-harm and suicidal ideation in a way that is unusual for a horror franchise aimed at a younger demographic. The story's handling of these themes was controversial among some in the community, with some feeling that the subject matter was handled sensitively, and others feeling that a horror anthology was not the appropriate venue for it. The willingness of the franchise to engage with real-world pain in a franchise that had previously kept its horror at one remove from literal reality was a significant tonal shift. Fact 175. The Fazbear Frights installment, 1:35 a.m., is structured around an employee working the closing shift at a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location who encounters someone or something that shouldn't be there after hours. The story draws its power from the specific, mundane anxiety of being alone in a workplace late at night, a recognizable experience for a significant portion of adult readers, and then corrupts that mundane anxiety with something specific to the franchise. It's FNAF's horror applied to a situation that doesn't require any special suspension of disbelief to enter. Fact 176. The treatment of the animatronics as tragic figures in the franchise, as victims who became dangerous because of what was done to them, rather than as inherently evil entities, is one of the things that most distinguishes the FNAF horror from conventional monster narratives. They don't want to kill you because they're evil. They're confused, they're in pain, and they've been in that state for so long that they've lost the distinction between friend and threat. The humans they pursue are stand-ins for the humans who failed them. The horror is misdirected grief, and that is a much sadder kind of horror than malice. Fact 177. The concept of the animatronic's consciousness being tied to specific physical components rather than to a central processor or a single location means that in the FNAF universe, identity can be distributed, fragmented, and partially destroyed without being fully eliminated. An animatronic that is destroyed may not be gone. A soul that has lost its host may find another one. A system that has been shut down may still carry traces. This distributed nature of consciousness in the franchise's metaphysics is what makes William Afton so persistent. He adapts to whatever container is available because his self is not limited to any single one. Fact 178. The idea that the souls of the murdered children chose to remain, that they could have moved on but didn't, driven by a desire for justice or by grief of their own, adds moral complexity to their status as haunted objects. They are not passive victims. They are active agents who chose a specific form of persistence. In the FNAF 3 minigames, they corner William Afton deliberately. They move toward him. They encircle him. They are clearly choosing to do what they're doing. The question of whether what they do to him is justice or revenge is one the franchise leaves open, and the distinction matters enormously to how you interpret the ending. Fact 179. The security breach endings that involve the Pizzaplex's destruction by fire carry an obvious narrative echo of the FNAF 6 ending. Buildings burning as a form of resolution, fire as the mechanism by which haunted places are finally cleared. The repetition of this imagery across multiple entries suggests that in the FNAF universe, fire is the franchise's most reliable resolution. Not a cure, not a healing, but a conclusion. Things end in fire. They either rest or they don't, but the fire at least provides a definitive punctuation to the location's story. Fact 180. The FNAF franchise's influence on horror game design more broadly has been significant. Games that feature limited resources, static character positions with surveillance mechanics, and narrative mysteries revealed through environmental exploration have proliferated in the decade since FNAF's release. And most of them acknowledge the debt, explicitly or implicitly. The Survive the Night horror game is a subgenre that FNAF largely defined, and its mechanics, the camera system, the finite resource, the staggered animatronic threat management, have been borrowed, modified, and homaged across hundreds of subsequent games. Fact 181. The mechanical design of the original FNAF has been analysed extensively from a game design perspective. The key insight is that the game creates anxiety not through action, but through potential action. The animatronics might come, the power might run out, the doors might need to close. The horror is in the gap between what is happening and what might happen, and that gap is experienced in the player's body as physical tension rather than intellectual engagement. The game is played with adrenaline, and the drop after a successful night is a genuine physiological release. Fact 182. The use of the limited camera view, the small monitor screen, the grainy footage, the fact that cameras can only show you one thing at a time is not just a gameplay limitation, but a thematic one. The characters who operate the Fazbear locations have access to surveillance technology, But that technology is insufficient. The cameras don't cover everything, the image quality is poor, the field of view is narrow. Even with the tools of observation available to them, there are always things happening in the dark that they can't see. Surveillance without comprehension is not safety. Fact 183. The concept of luring. The idea that the animatronics are drawn towards sound and movement connects the franchise's horror to real predatory behavior in a way that creates a specific kind of dread. Predators in the natural world are drawn to sound and movement. The prey response is to freeze, to be still, to reduce the signals that attract attention. FNAF puts the player in the prey position and makes stillness a survival strategy, which is a very effective way to create the specific physiological experience of being hunted. Fact 184. The fan community's collaborative timeline documentation. Projects like the comprehensive FNAF timeline documents maintained by dedicated community members represents an extraordinary collective intellectual effort.